And welcome back. You can see that we're inside of our parts ram at this point. Our donor slash parts ram slash 2010 ram, however you want to look at it at this point. And just working on getting this center console out of here. And a couple things I wanted to show you on this is that so far there's a couple bolts. One bolt on each side here, towards the floor, towards the rear, on left and right hand side. Also underneath the trim panels on left and right hand side, driver's side, there's another bolt hidden underneath each trim panel on each side. And then just as Scott Rod showed in his video, process is the same. You reach in, let me get this back down in there and show you what I mean. So there's our top piece there. Now there's a little plastic or a little like a rubber liner in here you pull out, and there's two Phillips screws underneath there. Once the Phillips screws are out of there, the two rear corners are out, the two front corner bolts are out. If you get a piece of trim removal tool underneath this edge here, this chrome bezel then pops out. Because remember, remember that the shifter located on this truck is in the console, and when we put it on the red one, we have to convert this over to it'll have a cup holder assembly in here, but it needs to have the one in it that doesn't have the shifter assembly in it. So with this trim removal, or with this piece of trim removed, you can then pop this piece of trim out. This entire silver bezel trim comes out at the top, and you can kind of get a better idea of what you're looking at here. So you can see underneath this piece of trim, which we need to remove to get better access to it, you see a bolt on this side, there's another bolt on that side. Over there, there's going to be some electrical that we need to disconnect as well, because again, we won't be keeping this particular cup holder in it. We need the one that doesn't have the stick in it, so we'll need to actually take this entire 12-volt charging port and its associated wiring out with us. And then we'll also need to work on seeing what we need to do to get this shifting assembly at least loosened up enough that we can get the console out of here. I don't think there is any. I'm just looking for, there may be some screws hidden or bolts hidden underneath the rubber inserts for the cup holders. I'll have to dig for those, but that's what I wanted to show you thus far. We're making progress. We're getting there again. And this back half of the console, not that you need to remove it, but this back half of the console will pull off, and you can see that we're gaining access to our door here, or the side valence, I should say. This side trim panel looks like once we get this bolt out and that bolt out, we may be able to just pull this entire side panel off at that point. Because again, we kind of want to disassemble this thing as far as we can, because we want to clean it up, wash it, clean it up real good. Now if you're just looking at pulling the console, you may not want to take it quite down this far, but we are. But again, this back piece will pull off. There's your electrical connector for your power port there. And there we go. So that's what I was saying earlier in a previous video. If you mentioned that if you're going to be putting a center console into a 1500 that does not have a center console, one of the things you need is this new bezel trim piece, because of the way, as you can see right down there, the way this trim piece here, which goes on top, meshes in with the trim piece on the dash. And that's the other reason why we're going to be taking this entire dash out of here, just to kind of keep all the looks and all the color scheme and everything the same. But that's where we're at. You can see I can actually grab this console and move it almost entirely as one piece and kind of slide it out of here. But what I want to do is see about potentially, I don't know, we may have to disassemble and completely remove this to include the shifter, and then come back and reattach our shifter, because remember, we need the shifter to stay in here because we still have to be able to move this truck around as we need it, and of course we need the shifter in there in order to do that. But it is moving as one assembly, as you can see there. It's all moving as one big piece. So I think once we get our electrical undone here and possibly remove our shifting cable, although I'm going to see if I can just unbolt. Yeah, it looks like we may just be able to unbolt the shifting assembly and just kind of let this sit here while we slide this out. I don't know, we'll have to see. Anyway, it'll get interesting, but that's what we're looking at so far. I just want to kind of make you aware of that. And we're going to continue to kind of piddle away at this and figure out what is the best way to kind of get this out of here again, with leaving this shifter assembly in here. May have to play some games with it, but I'll let you know how that goes. I want to take this center piece off next, which in stereotypical Ram fashion should just be removing that piece of trim there, or that rubber insert. And there should be, yeah, a couple of star bolts inside of there, and then this panel, this whole trim piece should then pull forward and allow us to disconnect some electrical. There'll be an electrical connector, should be one going to these controls here, and then we'll be able to pull that forward and get to our 2 bolts here and continue our disassembly of our console. But I'm going to go ahead and work on that, and I'll bring you back. Thank you much. And welcome back. So you can see we've got our center dash bezel or trim removed at this point. When you're taking this trim off, yes, there is the 2 screws we covered earlier on there, and you can start popping the most of this out, but don't forget to remove your piece of trim around your power port if you have one, or if you don't have anything here, see if this trim needs to be popped out anyway. And there's a star screw right there that's anchoring this to an additional brace behind the dash. More than likely they reinforce this because there is a plug here, and you know, plugging devices in and unplugging them out without that additional bracing will more than likely break the plastic over time. But as you can see, we're loose. We just got our electrical to undo, and to correct what I said earlier, looks like the electrical is going to be here. Good, disconnect here for 4-wheel drive, because this vehicle has 4-wheel drive, plus upper and lower switch banks, plus the climate controls all run into the face of this. So we've got a couple of plugs to disconnect, and we should be able to get that center trim out. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of that, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So the 2 bolts that we took off of that were on top of here, that were behind this piece of trim on the front, I thought we had to take them off to get them out. It actually wasn't these, it was actually 2 bolts here on the side. But taking these out along with this back one here allows this whole side panel to then come off of the box itself, and we can get a better view of this, again, shifter assembly that we're looking to take out of here that we don't need. And you can see it's got an electrical cable, which we can easily take that off to get around it, but it has this shifting cable that there's no cut or slit in this plastic here that makes up this console in the front. So we need to get this cable detached so we can at least get this shifter then unbolted, slide the rest of the console out of here, and then just put our shifter assembly back on, since it's going to stay with the truck. So what I'm going to do is just work on looking at the instructions last night. It looks like this will just pop off of this pin here on the side of the shifter assembly. We can get this out of here, take off our electrical, and then we should be able to unbolt our shifter. Looks like there's 3 bolts, 2 bolts in the back and 1 in the front, and then just take this whole cup assembly slash shifter out of here. And if I didn't mention it in the previous clip, there was a screw underneath the cup holder there, 1 there, and a 3rd one there. I should say some additional bolts that bolts this, helps bolt this assembly onto the console section. So I've got the emergency brake set on this truck. I've got the wheels chalked in addition, because when I break that loose from there, what I don't want to do is, you know, pull backwards on this cable and inadvertently, you know, get the transmission to slip into neutral, because that would be a bad thing. Because again, all of your electrical is in this center shifter, so your, you know, your neutral interlock and your safety interlocks that keep you from putting it into neutral or gear without your foot on the brake is all of your electronics that you see here. So disconnecting that shift cable from that, you know, would potentially allow you to shift it, you know, without your foot on the brake and such. But I don't know, because there may be a mechanism in the transmission that also prevents you from doing it. But I guess what I'm getting at is just be safe. Again, we got our emergency brake set, and we've got our wheel chalked to keep us from rolling either direction. So what I'm going to do is work on getting this popped out of this pin here, get it removed here, take off our electrical connection that you see here, and I'll get those bolts undone and see if we can just then get this shifter assembly, finally get this center console out of here, and then we'll put the shifter assembly back in. But I'll bring you back in a minute. And welcome back. So yes, that will just pull off of that pin there. The front part of this holder, this white plastic clip here, will unclip from there, and we've undid our electrical, and the electrical to the center shifter also had a Christmas tree clip that was secured right here. So with that being all disconnected, we should now be able to just grab this center console and kind of pull it backwards and get it out of here in one piece. And there we go. Yep. So now inside the manual, when they're talking about disconnecting this cable, we'll have to go and look, but rather than remove this entire side piece of trim, they show that there's a little door that apparently you can access to get that shifting cable off. But cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and finish getting the rest of this console slid out of here. Close that up. Okay, perfect. So we'll just get that off to the side. Now I did undo the 3 bolts as well as the electrical connector to the front power port. So we should be able to lift this out of here now. So that's your entire shifting assembly slash cup holder if you have one. And then what we'll do is we're just going to place that right back there. We're going to hook our shifting and our electrical back up, and that way we can still move the truck around as needed, because again, we don't need this entire centerpiece. If you remember from a previous video, and we'll cover this in a short, we have the replacement cup holder assembly that will fit into here and basically just turns it into a big, as they call it, a coin bank or coin location. And that coin location has the spot, and we need to remove it, but we'll need to get that power port out of this assembly here and transfer it over to our replacement assembly. But you can see that's one of the brackets that we need right there. That's the rear bracket for the center console. And you can see the front bracket right there for the center console that you typically won't have on the 1500s. If you're going to put a center console into 1500 that doesn't have it, if you're going to buy one of these center consoles used off eBay or a junkyard, whatever the case may be, make sure that they're also giving you this rear bracket and that front bracket, because you're going to need them both, along with the side trim pieces for both sides, because they're a little bit different, and the mounting hardware. So again, it's one of the reasons why we opted to go ahead and again purchase this entire truck from the salvage auction. You know, mainly because we knew we were going to do this, and you know, we wanted to look at potentially getting all the wiring harnesses and make sure that if we needed like a special bracket or a screw or anything of that nature, we could just pull it off of this one. So I'm going to go ahead and getting the rest of this console out of here. And yes, as you can see, yet even more change. We'll add that to our change pile and continue to, again, we'll do that recount here in a bit. Here is some additional change that, again, found in the bottom of the console. And then one of the reasons why is we wanted to completely disassemble this, and we'll take this side panel off as well, and you can see it here, is that we're going to take all the electrical off of here, unclip everything, and you can probably see it in the camera view, but this thing is just incredibly dirty. I mean, it's got a lot of, you know, and I should be using gloves and I'm not, I get it. It's got a lot of sticky residue on here. Whoever drove this particular truck last liked, I guess they liked sweet drinks or sugary sodas or something, but it's going to need quite a bit of a cleanup. But no harm, no foul. Something we could easily do. We'll get them all cleaned up, let them set out in the sun and dry, and we'll go on from there. But again, let me go ahead and finish getting the rest of this console out of here in one piece. We're going to hook this back up for safety reasons, also to allow us to continue to move the truck around. It's going to be a little bit of a bear to shift because it's not mounted to the center console, but we'll just have to hold on to the center console as we shift if we have to move the truck around the yard. Because again, it's the only way this truck's going to move is just to move it left, right, up, down, and kind of get it out of the way. When we need it out of the way, it's never going to go back on the road again, as we stated earlier. So we're going to get this out of here, and I'll bring you right back in a minute. And welcome back. So you can see that we've got our shifting cable reattached to our shifter, which is now just kind of laying there on the floor, as well as its electrical. Went ahead and removed the rear and the front mounting brackets for that center console that we showed you earlier. And these rear bolts do extend and are exposed underneath, as you can kind of see the daylight shining through the bolt hole there. So you may have to get underneath and spray them down with a little rust penetrant. These look a little bit rough, but I'm going to clean these up with a wire wheel and obviously just reuse these bolts, because we're going to need this mounting hardware to mount it back into our 2010 cab. And what I'm going to do next is just continue to pull trim and everything off the sides. You can see I don't know if I showed you this in the previous clip. We started pulling some of this trim up yesterday before we tackle the center console. Now that the center console is out, we're going to just continue to pull trim pieces off the passenger side there, and in an effort to then be able to roll the carpet back and get access into the wiring harnesses that run this direction from side to side. Because again, what we want to do is cut into this harness, or at least undo the harness and unwrap it, and see how much of this existing connector we can get undone and out of here, and be able to potentially just graft it over into our other vehicle. Again, that'll be the center console. We know where that one goes. We have this one already accounted for in our 2010 Ram, but what we want to chase down is this connector here and this connector here. One of these two is going to have the bulk of the wiring just go straight over to the passenger side connector for its heated and ventilated seat functions. So I'm going to go ahead and get this console inside the house, and like I said, I'm just going to continue to pull up some trim pieces on the passenger side there, and I'll bring you back for the next piece. But yeah, we're slowly getting it all parted out here, one little bit at a time. So I'll bring you back in a bit. And welcome back. So you can see that we've got our carpet on our parts ram at least pulled up to the point that we can access that wiring harness, very similar to the wiring harness inside of our 2012, inside of our red Ram, or Project X, or Candy Apple, however you want to call it. But that's what we're interested in. So now that we've got access to this harness that goes across, also what we have here is that this is the wiring diagram, at least per all data, for a 2010 passenger seat body harness connector. So what they mean by body harness, that would be the connector coming off the wiring loom, which you see here, which according to this diagram should be a 14-pin connector, of which this is. And you can see that we've got a listing here what each one of these pins are actually tied to. So you can see that this is the right front seat, heated temp sense, the inverter status, and so on and so forth. So everything that is needed to control the right side seat, everything from power to the seat, to the little 110 volt inverter that was inside, to the heated and ventilated seats, will go through this connector. So what I want to do is use a combination of a seam ripper, and just really careful with a standard razor cutter, and just kind of come through and cut the tape binding the harness together, and follow it down and try to track down exactly where all the wires in this harness, this connector, are going to. I don't want to cut any wiring yet. I don't want to remove any wiring yet. I just want to know where it is going. And then, like I said, the majority of these should be going back over and meeting up with a connector on the driver's side, which, just to show you that one, I believe it is this one here. Yeah, right rear, yeah, right seat vent. So this is the body connector for the driver's side, but this is the 20-pin connector that has the control lines and feeds and such coming from the passenger seat over to the driver's seat, which then plugs into the heated seat module. So I got a theory, or I'm theorizing, a lot of these wires are going to snake down this way through this harness and meet up to that other connector. But that's what I want to do. And so I'm going to go through and just kind of cut all of this tape, start separating this loom, and getting out, start getting out some of the pieces that we need. So I'm going to work on this, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So as you can see, we're starting to peel the tape back on our harness and be able to separate our harness into its individual strands, to include the driver's side over here. You can see we've got this little protective wiring loom removed and separated each of the 3 plugs out, so we can kind of get a better idea of where our wiring's going. Now, earlier we commented on that the 20-pin connector, which is this connector here on the driver's side, has several lines in it that are responsible for going over to the other side of the truck to control the seat's heat and things. I'm sorry, this is the 14-pin connector. My apologies. This is the 20-pin connector that you see here. And if we pull up on this just ever so slightly, yeah, we've got a bundle of wires that come over here and go through what I've went ahead and uncapped the wiring tray on the driver's side here. But you can see that we've got a bundle of wires right here that come off of our 20-pin connector, branch out and head over to the other side. So these are the control lines and the temperature sense lines and such that go from the driver's seat over to the passenger seat, that allow that heated seat module located over here to drive the vents and the heated pads on the passenger side. So that's why we're kind of getting all this separated, get an idea again how the wires are being routed, where they're being routed, and then using our wiring diagrams and our pinouts to tell us what wire is doing what. Now, to add more to this, and I know wiring isn't everybody's cup of tea, but and this will probably get a little bit boring. I do apologize, but I actually enjoy wiring. I enjoy looking at wiring diagrams, as sick as that might sound. This is our 14-pin connector on our driver's side. You can see that we've got it all separated so we can trace down what's going where. And one of the things that we need is right here. We got a white with orange and a white with gray coming out that connector. That is our CAN IHS tie-in. So this is the CAN circuit that's inside of the cab here, and this is the network that the heated seat module talks to. Now you'll notice it also, so it comes up out of this wiring tray, you can see it right there, hits some splices here, comes down into our connector here for the heated seat module, but then these splices also carry on to the passenger side of the truck and go to another module. So when we're taking this connector out of here, what I'm going to end up doing is actually just cutting it right here at this set of splices that come off and go to this connector. And that's because we need to make sure that this side of the CAN circuit can still talk to this side of the CAN circuit going to the other side of the vehicle, because we don't want to disrupt communications to whatever else this side of the splice is talking to, because again, we still want to be able to start, run, and move this vehicle if we need. So if we were to come in here and take this line, this twisted pair line, and you can always kind of tell your communication lines because generally they'll be twisted like they are right here, just to minimize crosstalk between and, you know, interference bleeding over from another line, another power line, especially considering they're all crammed into one tray here. But if we were to cut it here, which is, it's coming from another device up here in the dash, then we would not only sever communication to, you know, the heated seat module that was on the driver's side, but whatever communications module is all the way over on the passenger side, because eventually these pairs hit the wiring tray on the passenger side and then go elsewhere. So we would be cutting another module out of the internal bus, which, you know, something we probably don't want to do, at least not in this stage of the game, because again, we need to leave the truck functional. We just want to take off the bits and pieces that we need. Now you see another pair here that's twisted pair. It looks like it's green with tan and maybe green with blue or green with gray, somewhere around in there. And according to the pinouts, this is for our driver's side seat buckle. So that's what senses whether you've got the driver's side seat buckled in or not. So we know we need that pair, and then what we have to do is go through and trace down the rest of these pins on both this connector and the 20-pin connector, because again, we're not going to worry about this connector because we know this goes to the center console, but this connector exists in our side of our 2012, so we don't have to accommodate for it. This one's actually already there, pre-wired up and ready to go. We just need to worry about the 14-pin that we need to run everything in the seat, and the 20-pin that we need in order to run the communications in the passenger side of the seat. Let's see what else we have here. So yeah, you can see that we've got a main ground line here. Black with a white stripe is ground, and it goes towards, there's a center ground lug. If you can see it there, you'll see a bunch of black wires with white stripes going into a ground lug in the center. That's where that guy's going. But this is a fused constant 12-volt power coming in on this line here, but you can see if we follow our line, it actually doesn't come from the driver's side down to the wiring tray. It's coming over from the passenger side somewhere, so we need to kind of track that one down. Now what we'll more than likely do on this one, this is probably spliced in and also feeds constant 12-volt power to the driver's side, because the constant 12-volt would be for the electric motors in the seats to control the seat forward and back and up and down. In other words, the power controls. And that circuit, according to the wiring diagrams, is actually shared with the passenger side. So chances are power comes in on the passenger side there, ties into the passenger side connector, and then gets spliced over here to the driver's side connector. So this is one that we can trace down where it comes to just as it hits the passenger side connector. Give us some slack and then cut it, because we'll have to have the same type of setup on our 2010, because they're sharing power here. We're going to mimic that setup when we go to our 2012. So that's what a lot of this is. A lot of it is just going through the existing wiring harness, cutting through, as you can see here, getting access to the wiring trays, figuring out what all these wires do, where they're at, which ones we need, which ones we don't need. Because on the passenger side, if you remember, the 110-volt inverter is sitting up underneath the seat. We do not have an inverter in our 2012, so we can potentially trace down all the wiring to make that inverter active and steal the switch bank out of our 10, put it in our 12, do a little programming on the truck. But to tell you the truth, I don't think I want to trace all the extra wiring down for the passenger seat just to run a 110 volt inverter. I've had inverters in these trucks before and used them on a very, very, very rare occasion. More often than not, you know, you're using the cigarette lighter and putting a USB adapter in it to charge like a USB phone or something along that nature. I don't know, I'll have to look into it. If it's easy enough to get the wiring separated from the loom, and it's easy enough for us to wire into our 2012, then I may keep the inverter functionality and just add it to the truck, or just, like I said, just omit it altogether, because it's not really a huge deal, at least right away. So that's what going to be a lot of this is. I'm not going to bore you with this with a step-by-step, but I'm just going to continue to go through wiring diagrams, trace down exactly what all these wires do, where they're all going. Like, you'll see just some more for you. You see these two pink with a yellow tracer? This is what they call, just to give you I'll give you another example. I know I'm rambling. Pink with a yellow tracer in our 14-pin connector. Just looking at this is what they call fused ignition run control output. You'll see it's pink with yellow on both pins 18 and 20. And these pins 18 and 20, you'll see both of these are the exact same color. And they come through, and we have to trace them down inside this wiring channel, because I bet you more than anything that these are spliced in somewhere. Because what those should mean is I think what this is trying to say, that these are 12 volt when the ignition is on, versus our 12 volt constant, which if I were to put a meter on this now, this would be live, and these would only be live if the ignition is turned on. So I'm going to trace these down and see if they're spliced maybe somewhere inside this tray. They may also be spliced somewhere up in the dash, but once I can confirm that these are nothing more than just 12 volts with an ignition source, then we can kind of trim these up wherever we would like to trim these up, and we know how to wire these going into our 2012. Anyway, I understand that was a lot. I understand that was a lot of rambling, but that's what it's going to be for the next little bit for me here. It's just again looking at the connectors and the pinouts and wiring diagrams and figuring out what's going where, what we need to cut, what we need to keep, what we need to continue to trace down. But with that being said, I'm going to continue to work on this, and I'll bring you back in a bit. Bye. And welcome back. You can see that just following up on our last video in which we were disassembling and removing the center console, which you can see the pieces of that are now here in the garage. And what we're currently working on, and I'll show you, is that we went ahead and removed the dash off both our donor RAM and our 2010 RAM. One thing I did do between the two is that we know that we're going to put this dash, which is the dash out of our donor RAM, the gray dash, into our RAM. I did swap the airbag. I just want to show you what I did here. You can see there's enough flex. It kind of grips into the side. You can see with those points there. And also locks in with these points here. But there's enough flex in this side of the material that you can kind of bend these back while at the same time you pull up at an angle an airbag. And once you get these tabs clear, the airbag will roll out. And the reason why I took the airbag off the dash from our 2012 and put it into our 2010 frame is that since this airbag was 2 years newer, obviously I wanted to keep the newer airbag with the system, and B, this is the airbag that came with that truck, so I want to keep the airbag and the airbag serial number the same. But as you can see, it's the same style of airbag between the 2010 and the 2012. It uses the same type of frame. I'll show you here. This is the dash we took out of our 2012, the one that we're going to replace. You can see the airbag mount is identical between the two. So went ahead and got that swapped over. You saw in the previous video, we got the center console and everything removed. Now everything here still has to go through a pretty good cleanup process before we can start installing it into our 2010. I just want to show you here the inside of the 2010 with the dash removed. And like I said in the previous video, don't worry, you didn't miss anything because there's videos of us doing the similar dash removal off our 2009 TRX, and I'll put a link in the description below, and there'll also be a link at the end of this video to those videos in case you're curious about exactly how this dash comes out. It's not a lot to it to get these dashes out. It's a lot of fastening hardware, and potentially, you know, there's your airbag connections for the passenger side airbag dash we were looking at, and a lot of electrical. But just want to point this out to you here. If you remember our 2010, we were concerned with, since it didn't come with the heated and ventilated seats, if we were going to have the wiring necessary to plug that module into. And if we look right here, there's our plug. It was just plugged into a blank slot in the back of our cluster, and I'll show you that here in a second. But it is there. It is there. We can plug into it. So all we have to do is install the switches into our bezel and then plug it into it. Now we're going to be using the bezel that came out of the 2010, so that bank of switches is there, but the wiring is there already in the dash for us to plug into. It also has a plug in here for the four-wheel drive connector. If we would have had it, it's just plugged into an unused slot here in the dash when it's there. And it also has provisions for the 110 volt power outlet. So at least as far as the dash is concerned, a lot of the wiring is already here, but unfortunately, you know, we don't have pigtails sitting here below the seats. Now I did look at the wiring on this, compare the wiring diagram on this 2010 versus the 2012. Got kind of an idea where everything is at, and we are going to have to run our own power lines for the powered seats, the heated and ventilated seats. We're also going to have to tap into the IHS CAN, which I believe IHS is internal high-speed CAN. It should be the CAN that just deals with the internal cab components, if I'm not mistaken. We'll have to tap into that CAN. But just like in our 2010, the CAN circuit that we need does come from the driver's side, runs through this wiring bundle, hits here, splits up over here, and one of the splices that it makes is to come into the passenger door module. So the wiring is there for us to tap into to provide that CAN circuit. And we'll get into more details on this in a separate video, because I'm going to cover wiring in another video because the wiring is going to be a job in and of itself. It's not too bad, but it's going to eat a little bit of time. If you remember, we're not going to use the factory connectors that came in this harness. We're going to take the factory connectors off our 2010, since it has all the pinouts we need and all the wiring we need, and we're just going to splice in to this harness where applicable. So again, we'll cover that in another video, but that's where it sets. What we're doing right here is just getting the bottom of this guy vacuumed out, which we've already done. Now we're just going through with some all-purpose cleaner, and as you can see, just cleaning up sections of this in the bottom where it's apparent that, you know, just dirt over time getting through carpet and people spilling drinks that have been soaking through the carpet, things of that nature, just kind of getting that cleared up. And when we took out the console in the 2010, if you remember, there's a bracket that bolts here that the console mounts to. Again, I don't know if I showed this to you in a previous video, but you can see one threaded insert there. The other threaded insert is right here, just covered up with tape. So we do have the provision that we needed to bolt that back bracket for the console into this frame, and as well as the front, if you remember, is just going to bolt, I believe it's to this front bar here or this lower bar here, one of the two. So we'll have to get into that, but we do have a provision to put our brackets in, which is good. This is the connector that provides the power to those power outlets in the center console. It actually is already wired up into this truck, so we don't have to do any wiring there. We just need to account for the wiring for the seats. So before I wrap up this video, I figured we would go ahead and take care of a rather simple modification that we've done to previous Rams, that we're going to do the same thing to this Ram. And if you see the air box back here, nice and easily accessible with the dash removed, so no greater time to do this than now. is that you'll see that unlike on the upper trim levels that have a cabin air filter, this Ram does not have a cabin air filter. But it's the same air box they use regardless. They just have this piece of plastic here that seals off this area. But if you look real close, and let me get you some light. Oh, once I can find what I did with my shop light. There it is. One moment. I left it over here on the bench where I picked you guys up from the charger. So you see me do this in another video if you've been watching the other video series on this channel. You can see that groove, that outline that's already there of where the cabin air filter would go, and also make accommodations for the air filter door. You'll see a little pin here and a pin here, and those square pins line up with a little notch there and a little notch there that has to be cut out. And then this filter cover will snap onto the front. And in this case, we're going to be using a Wix cabin air filter. Now, granted, nobody's cabin is 100% air sealed from the outside, so you're not going to be able to filter 100% of the air that's coming into the cab, but at least you'll be able to filter the air that's, you know, kind of either being blown in your face or blown down towards your feet. And granted, this is a 2010, but with the dash removed, you can see the accumulation of dirt and dust that just builds up on stuff over time. So then don't worry, before we go putting the replacement dash and everything back in, once it's cleaned up, you know, we'll be giving all of this at least a thorough wipe down as we can. Another thing that we're going to do is that, remember this rear actuator on top of here for the blend door, and that's the actuator that controls the blend door you see here that toggles between outside air and recirculating cabin air. We went ahead and bought a new actuator. We're going to go ahead and change that out, even though this one's not having a problem. But again, look at it. The best way to get to this is with the only way to get to that actuator is with the dash removed, kind of coming in through the top between these two vents here to get to that. So while we have access to it, we're going to go ahead and replace it. That way it doesn't become an issue down the future in which we have to pull the entire dash out again in order to get to it. So it's kind of while you're here moment. The other three actuators, we're going to leave them in place because they're easy enough to get to with the dash installed. Yeah, you may have to remove the glove box to get to this one, or the center console, the center trim piece to get to these two, but they're much more easily accessible than versus that top one. So what I'm going to do is just take a box cutter and slightly score, get you some light in here, slightly score this little outline line that you see that goes all around this box to the point we can get this plastic piece out, and then we'll get our filter installed. So let me work on that and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So just to give you an idea of what I'm doing here, you can see I'm just etching that plastic ever so slightly, pass by pass, until it gets through here, and then we're going to continue that all the way around until we get this piece cut out. It's not a very thick piece of plastic, so it doesn't take many passes to break through. But again, just be careful what you're doing. You don't want it to slip and inadvertently catch one of your fingers. But I'm going to continue to work until I get this piece out, and I'll bring you back. And welcome back. So you can see we got our plastic blocking plate removed, just cut out, just to show you that there. Not a very thick piece of plastic at all. It's just there to block it so it doesn't get stuck in constant recirculation of cab air. But I'm going to take our Wix filter. I'll put a part number in the description of this door. It may be on here. I don't see it on this particular piece. Yeah, I don't see the part number etched on this piece. But the filter I'm using, and there's several filters that'll fit this truck, or a Ram 1500. This just happens to be a Wix. There's your part number there. But I'll put a part number for this blocking plate in the description. Also on Amazon, there are several people that are selling this as a kit where they'll sell you the door and the filter specifically for doing this mod. You can see the direction of our airflow over a filter is facing down, which it would be in this application's case, because the blower motor is going to pull air from either recirculation, which would be up here, down and through the box, or from the outside down and through. So it's just gonna, this will also tell us if we need to trim any more of our plastic out to get this in here. There we go. So that's our filter. And then I'll take our door in the direction of airflow. You can see they've got the arrows with the airflow direction on the filter itself. And what I like to do is to clip this far side on first manually. And there we go. And then take this passenger side here with your finger and just kind of push it in place. And you'll feel it kind of lock. It's this latch on this side. Once you have this one latched in, again, just to show you that here, I'm just going to take the driver's side and push it over till it locks in place, and there you go. So we now have a cabin air filter modded in a trim level that normally would not come with a cabin air filter. It's not too hard to change out because, again, this is a mod, so it's not going to be terribly convenient to change that out when it comes time to do so, but it's not too bad. You just have to lower, do a couple things that makes it easier. I find it's easier to remove the little cubby hole that's on top of the glove box as well as the glove box. Once you get those two dropped down, you've got enough room. You can get this cover off and then get that air filter changed out. So that was, now that we've got that piece done, let's go ahead, and the last thing we'll do in this video is that we're going to change out this upper servo up here, which is, again, the blend door actuator servo that controls whether you're recirculating cabin air or pulling air in from the outside. Again, because we've got access to it at this point, and we normally do not once the dash is in place. So let's go ahead and take care of that. And don't worry, I will go ahead, I will take this, leave this filter in just so we don't drop any dirt into the blower motor, and we'll get all of this, you know, we'll clean this out as best as we can. Like I said, it's a 2010 and it's been pulling a lot of dirt from the outside, so, you know, it's not going to be 100% perfect, but, you know, it'll look a far cry better than what it does. But let me go get a Phillips bit and a small ratcheting wrench, and I'll show you what we're going to use that for, and I'll bring you back in a moment. And welcome back. Hopefully you can see that actuator in there. Oh, it's easier to get to with the dash removed. It's still a bit of a pain. It's way down in here. Well, not way down, but it's pretty good ways down in here. You can see the actuator there, and I went ahead and just unplugged the cable from it. There's two Phillips screws, one on this corner and one on this lower corner back here. And just like when we did our 09, the easiest way I found to get to that, to get anything in there, is to take one of these removable Phillips bits with a 1/4 inch ratcheting wrench, and that allows you to get down in there like this and give yourself at least a little bit of a ratcheting bit that's small enough to get down in that corner or those corners and get those bolts out. So that's what I'm going to work on. I'm going to work on getting down in here to get those two Phillips out. We'll get that actuator pulled out and replaced. And on these actuators, you see that it has a keyed way on them. You got a barrel here with teeth, and you got a section here with the teeth removed that you notice the arrow is lining up to. That should mean that this is at home position. Now, there is a calibration thing that you're supposed to run when you change these out via a scan tool, but so far every one of these I've changed out, I haven't had to run a calibration on. It's been fine just changing it. But if that changes and we have to run a calibration on it, we'll bring you along for that. But that'll probably be in a little bit later video once we start to get everything reassembled and get everything, start to test everything. But let me get to work on getting this actuator screws out and get the old one out and see about getting this new one in, and I'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So you can see we got our old actuator out, all dust and dirt covered. Now I am happy to see that you can see that this is a dark colored actuator, much like it is in our replacement. If you remember 2009, when this actuator failed, this was a lighter color, which tells me this might actually be the newer revision of this actuator, which would make sense with this being a 2012. See, this is AA, ends in 3361. Let's see if this is the same part number. AA ends in 3362. Okay, so this is a slightly newer revision. Looks like maybe by one. But like I said, we're going to go ahead and replace it. Not that this one was failing, it's just that we're here. It's accessible. Like I said, you can get in there, and the easiest way I found to get in there is with a 1/4-inch bit, 1/4-inch Phillips bit, and a 1/4-inch ratchet to actuate it. Like I said, you're just dealing with two Phillips screws that threading in the plastic. So once you get them to break loose, you can kind of get down in there with the bit and spin them out by hand. They're not too terribly tight. But we're going to go ahead and get this new one in, get it bolted up, get it electrically reconnected, and then we'll bring you back. One moment. And welcome back. So we got our actuator in, got electrical reattached. Now when you're putting an actuator in, keep in mind that it is splined to the blend door. You kind of see up in there. So when you take the actuator out, the blend door is going to fall forward and close. So you kind of have to push this up manually to get it to line up to where the splines need to be, to then get that mounting pin to line up and that mounting pin to line up. Yeah, that one there and that one over here. These pins will line up, and then you can put your screws in on that corner, and finally that corner. And you're just threading in the plastic, so it doesn't take too much to tighten them. You know, don't over tighten them, or they may have a tendency of stripping out on you. But anyway, also this upper duct you see here, we just kind of have it unbolted and folded out of the way. If you unbolt it from here, this one's pretty flexible and pretty small. You can kind of fold that out of your way, and then when you're done, you can just fold this back and put your screw back in. With this kind of pushed out of the way, it gives you a lot more room, makes it a lot easier to get into where that actuator is at. But with that being said, I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to call it a video at this point, because you've seen that like we promised you we would. We got the dash pulled out of this one. We do have the dash pulled out of the blue one, but it looks exactly the same as this one. I'll show you that here, probably in a different video, in case you want to see it. And we went ahead and again just did the cabin air filter mod and changed out that blend door actuator while we were here. We're going to continue to get the bottom of this truck cleaned up, get the inside of, you know, what the dash pad would normally cover up, get this cleaned up as best as we could. And then when we bring you back for the next video, we'll more than likely, we'll concentrate on wiring in the next one and get the powers that we need established for the driver and the passenger seat, get the communication lines tapped in that we need. So we'll be taking, again, the connectors out of our donor ram. We'll cut them off of the main body harness out of the donor, leave us some slack to work with, and we'll get them spliced in to either the existing can lines that we're going to need and or the new power lines that we're going to need. Now, as far as power, since I don't see any power lines running on this side where they should be, where they would normally get spliced for power seats, I'm going to run a main line from the fuse box or the TIPM in the hood or underside the engine compartment. We're going to run it out here and just basically have like a distribution block sitting here, and that'll give us access to constant 12 battery power that we need, some switched battery power that we need, and some grounds. And then what we can do is, because remember, we're going to have a console here which is going to do a really good job of kind of covering up our little distribution block that we're going to install, as well as give us a point again that we can kind of just put it here and run our power distribution down here, and then across to both sides of the seats where we need it. But anyway, that's the game plan. I'm kind of going a little bit of a tangent here. But with that being said, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so. If you have already subscribed to the channel, I thank you immensely. We are coming up rapidly on the door of 1,500 subscribers, and I thank each and every one of you for that. Again, the more subscribers we can get on the channel, the more it helps out the channel and easier to bring this kind of content to you. But with that being said, I'll let you go and I'll bring you back for the next one, and we're going to start getting into what I perceive to be some very interesting stuff, especially if you're into the electrical / electronic / wiring side of things, as well as getting the 2010 dash and console and the seats and everything finally retrofitted into this vehicle. And with that being said, I'll let you go and I'll bring you back for the next one. Thank you much. Bye.